Well, good morning, and this will probably be more of a thought for the week, depending on how things go. But it's still the school holidays here, so hoping to take another couple of days towards the end of the week, and that may mean things are a bit more squeezed. So, Numbers is where we are at in our Old Testament reading plan, and we've just started Numbers 1 and 2. We move, I suppose, from entrails and blood sacrifices to lists of names. Entrails and blood sacrifices are not entirely left behind, it turns out, but there's certainly more kind of random lists of names. And I don't know which people find more bewildering when we're reading the Old Testament. Both are difficult in different ways. What is Numbers about then? Marie Curie discovered and isolated radium quite a long time ago, and those discoveries that she made were helpful in the development of X-rays and also for treating cancer. But of course, the discoveries that she made cost her her life, because the exposure that she had to radium and other radioactive elements during the course of her research caused her to contract leukemia. And so we benefit hugely from her work, but she also functions as a warning. Her life tells us, don't mess with these radioactive substances. And the New Testament tells us the story of Israel in the desert, which is where we're at in Numbers, is both a bit like it's a bit like that. It's both a warning and an encouragement. And as we read the Pentateuch, as we're going, for the Pentateuch, Genesis to Deuteronomy, 5 books, Pentateuch. It's helpful to see the whole of the Pentateuch as a kind of club sandwich. So what do I mean by that? Well, at the heart of it actually is the book we've just read. It's Leviticus. That's the meat of the sandwich. Probably not pork, but we won't go there. It's the meat of the sandwich. It's about approaching the presence of God. In one sense, that's the theme of the whole of the Pentateuch. How can God dwell among his people safely? And at the heart of the book of Leviticus was the Day of Atonement, Leviticus 16, through the sacrifice that enables God's people to approach him and for God to dwell among his people. But actually the whole of the Pentateuch is kind of about that. So if you then come out from the centre, the meat, would it be lettuce on either side of the bit of meat? That's Exodus and Numbers, the salad. They are both about journeying in different ways. So you get similar themes between Exodus and Numbers, and then coming out further still, you come to the context, the theatre for where this happens. Genesis and Deuteronomy are about land and about the promises of blessing, promises of land, blessing and descendants. So do you see, work inwards then from the bread. Again, Exodus and Numbers are about approaching how we get to the point where God's people can be in the presence of God, Leviticus. Do you see? So that's the structure of the Pentateuch. And within that, the Marie Curie thing, the story of Israel in the desert is both a warning and an encouragement to us. Now, Numbers has 3 titles. There is that are given. It's a bit like, some books have more than one title. The Hobbit has a title, There and Back Again, as well as The Hobbit, and Numbers is like that. So there's 3 different titles for Numbers. The one in the Hebrew Bible is In the Desert, and you get that from verse 1. Can you see that? In the desert, in verse 1 of chapter 1. And actually another title that was also given by Jewish people to the book of Numbers is simply And God Said, and He Spoke, which is the first words of the book. So 3 titles: Numbers, our Bible, In the Desert, and God Spoke. And actually those 3 things give us 3 themes to look out for as we go into Numbers. So as I'm talking, this thought is getting a bit longer. it's going to be a bit longer than normal, but this is going to help us to look out for the key themes in the book as we go through. So, first of all, in the desert. That's the first title theme to look out for. In the desert. Sinai is where they start, in the desert of Sinai, verse 1. By the end of the book, they're in the plains of Moab, getting ready to go into the promised land. And then actually the whole of Deuteronomy is Moses speaking to Israel on the edge of the promised land in the plains of Moab. But this book, Numbers, is about a journey, Sinai to the plains of Moab. Now, Sinai to the plains of Moab isn't actually a very long distance. It doesn't take 40 years to travel from Sinai to the plains of Moab. It's a matter of weeks or months. But there's a lot of there and back again. There's a lot of circling around as they go on this journey. So what is God doing as he leads his people through this? Well, he's teaching them something about the nature of discipleship. And certainly that's where the New Testament goes with this. That the Christian life is like going through the desert. We need to remember where we are. Now, coronavirus has reminded us of this, hasn't it? If ever we were thinking that this world was somehow meant to be our final destination, things like coronavirus bring that idol crashing down. This world is not our final destination. The author Robert Louis Stevenson, who lived in Hampstead for a very short period, a matter of weeks, I believe, but his blue plaque is up somewhere. He wrote this: better to travel hopefully than to arrive. And I think I've commented before in sermons. Robert Louis Stevenson had clearly never been in a car with small children travelling somewhere, because clearly it's better to travel hopefully than arrive is rarely the case, and it's certainly not the case in the Christian life. The travelling is the journey and it's not the destination. We're waiting for where we're going. We're looking forward to where we're heading for. Don't get distracted. Don't think that this life is what it's all about. We're not there yet, and the current circumstances we're in help us to be reminded of that. So that is one theme of Numbers, the journey, the desert. And the second one is these first words of the book. The Lord spoke, the Lord said. What does he say? Verse 1, verse 2, he says, take a census. And verse 17, Moses and Aaron do exactly what they're told. They listen to him. Now, this is a big theme in the book of Numbers. God is leading his people by his word. He speaks and things happen. When his people listen, things go well. When they don't listen, things go badly. So we see later there's a whole arrangement of the camp as they set out, and it's designed to show God is at the centre. So later in the book you see people, they got exactly who should go where, and it kind of works out as north, south, east and west, but at the centre, God is at the centre. And we sometimes ask in our lives, is God at the centre of all that we're doing? Is God at the centre of our church? Well, for Israel that was literally how it was meant to be. That the Ark of the Covenant and the Tabernacle is carried at the centre of God's people as they journey. And so before we think of human leaders leading God's people, we need to see and remember that God is the leader that we need. He leads by his word. He leads by his word in joy and in sorrow, in the good times and the bad, in calm and in crisis. How does God lead his people? He speaks. He leads by his word. That doesn't change, whatever our circumstances. And maybe that's helpful for us to remember at the moment and to look out for as we read through the book of Numbers. Whatever our circumstances, God is still leading us by his word. It matters that we listen to what he's saying. So don't give up in times of crisis, in times of pressure. Stay close to him. Keep listening to him in his word. He's still speaking to us. He's still guiding us and leading us. So that was the second title, God spoke. And then thirdly, the third title, Numbers. In the desert, God said, count the Israelites. That's then what we get in the rest of chapter 1 and indeed chapter 2. It's easy to switch off at that point and to think, what's the point of all these names? And our eyes glaze over. But actually think about it, lists of names and numbers can sometimes be very significant and important for us. Whether it's the company accounts or our bank statements or the football scores or even just the list of ingredients for our favourite cake recipe. Lists can be really important. It's just when we read a list like this, we don't really understand it. We don't really get what's going on. Well, what is going on then? In chapter 2, there are over 600,000 people listed. The precise numbers as you go through aren't always quite clear, and exactly what is being counted is debated. But basically, we've got men of fighting age being counted in these lists and numbered. So that's just the men, and it's just the ones of fighting age. That implies, with women and children as well, that there are probably over 2 million people in the people of Israel at this point. Now, why do we need to know that? Why do we need to count that out and get so excited about the numbers? Well, what it's saying to us is God is keeping his promises. What were his promises? Promises to Abraham. What did he say to Abraham? He said, go outside, count the stars, if you can, so shall your offspring be. God's faithfulness in the past is now being seen, and being seen for what it is, from one man and his barren wife who couldn't believe it. They were told that when they were told they were going to have one child, they thought that was utterly laughable. Now there are 2 million. God is faithful. We can trust him. That is one thing that we then see with these great lists of people. Every time we read one of these lists, we say, that's God keeping his promises. Praise the Lord. He's a promise-keeping God. He's kept these promises. He's going to keep the promises that he's made to his people today as he gets us ready for the new heavens and the new earth. That's one thing to see. And also, then with that, why are they being counted? They're being counted in order to fight. In order to go and battle against God's enemies, against the evil Canaanites who've rejected God, who are living dreadful lives of idolatry, not just in worshipping the wrong God, but in child sacrifice and in deeply horrible ways of living. And God's judgment comes upon them as God's people go in to occupy the land that God has given them. So what are they told to do? What are they being numbered for? They're being numbered in order that they can go together and fight together in the battle against the God's enemies. Now the New Testament picks up on this kind of military language in places like Ephesians 6. We're in a spiritual battle in the Christian life today. And there's no doubt we're in a spiritual battle now, is there, with all that's going on, as not just fighting against a virus, but against our idols of comfort, of security, of materialism, for Christians, for non-Christians in the world. There is a battle going on right now in the circumstances we're in. So as we see preparation for battle in this book, we should be thinking of the battle that's taking place today in that way. Now this eventually was Jesus's story. As he resisted sin in the desert, how did he do that? He did that by obeying God's voice. And then as he trusted God's faithfulness to keep his promises in his battle against sin. Can you see that? That first of all points us to Jesus and what he has done. We're never just called to pull our socks up and get on and fight the battle by ourselves. It is a battle Jesus has won, has fought and has won for us. But therefore in him today, confident that the victory has already been won and joined to him by faith, we now fight in the spiritual battle. We need one another just as God's people needed each other We need to be led by God's word. And we need to keep going in the desert, not surprised by the circumstances we find ourselves in, but confident in the promises of God to keep his people and take us to the promised land.